I wanted to pick up a couple odds and ends here, short questions to answer. One of them was from Kevin. It says, "What are your thoughts on titanium white? Is it an acceptable alternative to flake white, or would you not recommend it?" And I don't have a problem with people using titanium as a substitute for flake white if they feel particularly worried about lead content getting into their blood. I was recently tested after all these years of using flake white and do not have a lead problem. So I don't consider it to be an issue. If cadmiums are it's every bit as bad, they're heavy metals. What are you going to do? Drop the cadmiums? In our world, you can't. We have two significant cadmiums we really need, and you're at least as vulnerable. So yeah, I've found though that what's really important over time, and believe me, I've gone both ways with this at different times, and I think the titanium may be a less expensive paint as well. I just find that when you're trying to hit light notes, get quality light effects, and that sort of thing, it's flake. And you can be in the ballpark. You always feel sort of less satisfied. I just find myself more repeatedly satisfied at what happens when I use whites, when I use the flake white in mixing. So, and the one thing we do know about flake white is that it actually is what sign painters use. Not flake, but lead base. It's got a remarkable permanence. It's also got the problem of if you leave it in the dark, flake. Obviously, you probably have heard that it will darken, but if you put it back in the sun, it'll come back to life again. That would be in the category of a thing that's heavily saturated with the flake, with the lead itself. And I don't know to whatever extent beyond that, in less whited colors on your canvas, whether that would cause a problem. So that was supposed to be a short answer to a short question. The second question is a discussion about the Fenway Studios and North Light. We had that conversation. Jack, had heard something about whether the building itself was able to stop the construction of a high-rise building across the highway that would have it would have wrecked the North Light. The fact is that did happen, actually. Well, I think while I was still there, some people did a lot of work with the city council and stuff to try to stop that. And I'm not always a big fan of interfering with progress and all that sort of thing, but that was a good thing for those of us who are in one of the last remaining Northlight studios made for the purpose in Boston. So the third one, though, is a question about the Cecil studios. And, I've said that before, it's not my thing to talk about other people and their studios. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about the third point. It had to do with Chuck Cecil. Charles Cecil, this gentleman asked, these talks certainly increased my appreciation for the Boston School and their way of seeing. I wonder how you feel about the methods of Charles Cecil, who I believe you studied with under Gamble. I didn't study with him. He was there before me, and I think sometime before me, and I don't know at what level of student he was, but I do know that he's a complete devotee of sight size, and actually at one point told some of my students that they basically were going to go to hell if they. That's a preposterous way of phrasing it. He didn't say that, but it was one of those things where his belief in sight size is so major that he doesn't even see the possibilities with our way of working. So we don't think the same way, and I diverge from Gamble on that as well. I know early on in his career, he actually opposed sight size himself, but for whatever reason, he never managed to work his way through what that would then mean. I have definitely successfully done that, and so I don't recommend anybody going to study sight size. I am totally, again, I'll repeat it, with Degas, who said, what is wrong with that guy? He has his people painting side by side, and if you say sight size, it's even worse. But Degas said, what does he not understand? It's an art of relations. And fact is, that's where all the music lies. The truth lies in the music. The truth lies in beauty. There's a way better way than sight size. So that's me talking from where I'm coming from. The use of a place on the floor, that idea of the place on the floor called sight size, where the object you're painting appears to be the same size, is nowhere near the problem of these methods that they use to transfer without learning to see relationships. So that's the limit of it. I won't talk anymore. I'm here for a major question. The big question of the day is from Liz. And Liz is asking, oh, that's online. No wonder I can't find it. Liz says, she worked with me a bit and early on, but so she knows something about what I'm talking about. But she says, how would you suggest a student deal with the changes that naturally occur with light? Do you suggest chasing what you see in front of you or sticking with the light that occurred another day? And how important is it that the student doesn't overwork their painting? Yeah, those are tied together. I mean, if you start chasing the light, you will absolutely overwork your painting. I mean, don't doubt it for a second. Chasing the light is one of the most impossible things. I mean, you get Monet painting for 20 minutes because the light changed. I mean, I don't know of anybody working outdoors today who thinks that's a good thing. But Monet knew that moment didn't last very long. You're lucky to get 20 minutes. There's enough, change. Now, if you talk about shadows moving, you can sort of sense that that's going to be fairly significant over time. But over a short period of time, too, Monet was seeing it. Well, it's no different in the studio. If you're painting a portrait, let's just say in the teaching studio, you have students painting portraits. If you can't teach them how to hit the color note on the day in which they set the painting up or the day they choose to set it up. So if you in New England are dealing with gray day, cloudy day things versus sunny, blue, you have to be able to lay the painting in, hitting those notes, put the time in to get quality notes, and then maintain them. Don't change them when you go to a day that turns cloudy and you're under pressure to go ahead and paint anyway. You can see that in my, and that may be why this came up. You can see it in my high-speed portrait painting thing where the painting is getting darker and lighter. At one point it turns decidedly orange, another day blue. It's all over the place, and you just have to be that sensitive to it. I don't find it problematical. I still finish that portrait in the same amount of time as I would finish anything else. If the days had been perfect, who knows if I probably might have finished it faster. I don't know. But that's sort of a fairly routine amount of time that it takes for me to do all the things I want to do in most pictures. It's somewhere around 30 to 40 hours. 40 is more typical, probably. I'm not one of these guys, by the way, and it brings up a funny subject, who brags about how long it took him to do a picture. That is no measure to me of anything. In fact, I liked what Daniel Green said. He said, when it's hanging on the wall, nobody asks how long it took. They just want to know whether it's good or not. And that's actually true. So I'm not opposed or in favor of, but I do find people overworking, and that's a question in a different way. When you talk about overworking, the idea of getting too much paint on is what I meant the first time. But when you talk about overworking a painting, if you as a student have the assignment of taking nature and painting it right up to the nth degree of detail, just to know how to do that, just to have been there and be skilled at it, that's one thing. But to think that the art of painting, that is to say the art of, if you want to call it the interpretation of what's in front of you, embodies that, you'd be just completely wrong, and you will tend to overwork paintings. Student paintings are almost always overworked, just because that's what's happening. They keep pushing details. There are levels, and I think she actually asked that a little later about details. Let's see if she does. How do you manage to stay consistent when getting into very small details? And she then says something else that I actually asked her to confirm or to correct or to verify with me what she actually meant. But I'll get into that in a minute. But it's the idea of, the more and more detail you add to things, unless you paint like left to right across a painting and are happy with what you get that way. If you're painting impressionistically, your job is to be all over the place at once, to observe relationally where the beauties lie in the relationships and bring them home and bring just the level of detail that is useful for your of articulation, of finesse, that's useful for your preconceived sense of beauty, right? Now, that embodies a lot of different thoughts. I mean, the very idea of the preconceived sense of beauty, if you're looking for as an impression of something and it's not beautiful, look at why you're painting there is a big question. I asked that before. But you have to look and see what it is about it that makes you want to paint it. And frankly, you shouldn't be painting anything you don't want to paint, something that hasn't compelled you with desire, as it were. to own it, so to speak, in your soul, to broadcast it, to say to somebody, look what I found, and which is the sort of the impressionist model and mindset. So what value then has it to lay on a whole bunch of detail, that some of which may damage the surface, other parts of which may cause problems for the effects, the colors and things like that. So, it isn't like you have to hold back. You can push forward. In fact, I consider my model to be, the model I have is one that can push forward to whatever degree of a finish, and I've done it, by the way, in copying a Paxton. Whatever degree of finish Paxton could get, I can get with my methods. And you could say, well, aren't they Paxton's methods? The methods, not precisely, but they're close. But my methods actually are just a bit, and significantly more, actually, Boston School than Paxton. And we can talk about that differentiation sometime if someone asks me, but I do consider Paxton to be a different person, decidedly more academic, and whereas the Boston School is oriented with a more balanced view. It is much more oriented around effect in the start. And the starts aren't quite the same, and I can demonstrate that for you. Again, if anybody wants to see my lay-in little short article with some images, ask me for it. So I think that mostly gets at that kind of problem. So when establishing a color harmony, how do you manage to stay consistent when getting into very small details? So if you establish a color harmony, you have set up a color harmony, how do you stay consistent? And the answer is I don't try to stay consistent. I try to make it even better. And when you go to the next level of detail, you'll find that it's all the little things in any given area. First of all, your job was to set up the major harmonies, the major masses, as it were. You're doing it in manipulating area by area, but only with big ideas in mind. And so when you get finally into a smaller area, you know that it's made out of both things that might weaken it and things that might strengthen the effect. And you just make sure that whatever you're doing in there leaves it with no less strong. And ideally, look for it to for those parts to enhance the effect if they can. So that's the strategy I take. And I'm not sure that can fully answer her question. But then she uses this thing where she says, without thinking conceptually. And I would suggest to you that the most important part of this thing is that you don't do anything without thinking conceptually, ever in painting at all, or you're just dabbling in mud. Ang says, unless you have a concept of the thing fixed in your mind and eye, you'll just be pushing shapes around all day long. Well, imagine that with paint. Imagine that with color. I mean, you don't have an idea, you're just pushing paint around. You don't have a concept, that's what an idea is. Well, and so the one thing I would add to that, and I think I'll end this with that, and I think I may have done justice to what she's asking. But that is that the concept is only possible in a relation, and there's only a relational idea, okay? So you don't say how big is that. Like sight-size guys will want to know how big that is, or they want to transfer a location. You don't do that and have a concept. What a concept is how that is to something, right? So if that's a size, you want to know how it feels to that size that you can see. If it's a size, you want to see what it is to this other size that's like that big. How does it feel to that size? You have to get that location right, just there, as a proportion. Proportions can be conceived. Color relations can be conceived. For example, if you look at two colors together, you can actually conceive of which one has the most chroma. You can hold that conceptually in your mind. One of the things I really recommend students do is when you're looking at your darks, to help you conceptualize them, to do it in relation to each other, and simply do it by saying, so let's look at these three darks. If I was looking at these three darks together, they're different from each other in color. And I say to myself, so let's just say, which is the red, which is the yellow, and which is the blue? So what you've done is you've taken three darks, they're fundamentally the same value, and you've said, oh, yeah, that helps me conceptually to see what they're up to in relation to each other. And this one definitely isn't blue enough, and this one doesn't even look warm at all compared to the other two. Do you see what I'm saying? But in comparison with. So that's what the idea of a concept is. I have not been able to discover that you can hold anything conceptual in your mind that isn't complex, that is, it isn't relational. So that's the last point I wanted to make on that. And thank you very much, Liz. I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks, hopefully. Don't forget to subscribe, to share, like, all those other things, comment too, and keep those questions coming in. I'm delighted. There's still a couple more that are out there. If I've overlooked you or if you haven't heard from me recently with your name attached, I do mean to respond to yours, Louisa. You bring up something that I don't usually talk about, which is the nature of the soulful side of painting, the intuitional slash, and because it's easy to get out there in a place that's not practical. And yet there is something that we're doing that's bigger than all of us in a certain way. And we can talk about it. There's something when it becomes music that's happening it's huge. So we'll get to that one, and I won't refer to any other ones. That's the biggest one, the longest one at least. Didn't have a question in it, so if you don't want me to talk about it, if you want me to talk specifically, ask me something. But I'll refer to some of the points you made. Thank you very much. Did I say who? That was Liz. Sam. Yeah, thank you, Sam, for one of those questions earlier. You were asking the one about the Cecil studio. And then Kevin. Those were the three people today. So you'll see yourself on in the lists.